Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's great to be back here at the Science Forum again to tell you about some of my other research that's going on. So today I'm going to be telling you all about plastics in agriculture and hopefully bring some new knowledge on this topic. So we live in the age of plastic, right? Since synthetic plastics were first invented in the early 20th century, I think it's safe to say that they have revolutionized manufacturing. There is nothing that we don't use and touch on a daily basis that is somehow made of plastic or made from machines or tools that were made of plastic, have some plastic components. I mean, they've really expanded into every single sector of manufacturing. And they're so attractive for manufacturing because of their properties. So synthetic plastics, when they were developed, we realized that they were lightweight, they were easy to make. We didn't have to go out in the environment and extract precious and expensive natural resources like wood or minerals. We could just make what we needed. We could make it in the size and the shape we wanted, in the colors we wanted. I mean, we were able to realize colors that were never before possible because we were using plastics. So they started getting a lot of popularity in the 1930s. And then with World War II in the 1940s, plastic manufacturing boomed because we realized all the applications, all the great applications we could use plastic in for military purposes. So things like tanks and artillery and radar and all these things have plastic components now. Again, we weren't limited by extracting natural resources. We could make exactly what we needed for the war effort. Once the war was over, though, we had all these plastic production companies that were booming and making a lot of money and needed more plastic to sell, and so they turned to the mass consumer market. And in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and when we saw development of a lot of the plastic products that we still use every day today, things like Tupperware and cellophane and Band-Aids, I mean, these are still an integral part of our everyday lives today. And I would argue our lives are better for all these plastic products. You know, they bring a lot of good to the world. And so we've made a lot of plastic things. Since 1950, it's estimated that we've made about 8.3 billion tons of plastic on this earth. That's a lot of plastic. And about a third of that, about 2.5 billion tons, are still in use today. So these are still the things we're using right now. But over half of them are past their intended use. They're no longer good to us. We can't use them anymore. They're broken, whatever. These are plastic things that we don't need anymore. And this is the big problem with plastics, is the property that makes them so great for manufacturing, this durability, is also the thing that makes it a nightmare when it comes to waste management and disposal. These plastics are not going to go away. And so all these, over half the plastics produced are now either sitting in landfills or sitting on our planet, and they're not going anywhere anytime fast. You know, recycling is an important part of our waste management, but from this diagram you can see that it's a pretty small part of the total plastic pool. We're not recycling enough of our plastics, and there's a lot of plastics that just can't be recycled. So it's only making a really dent in this plastic disposal issue. And so what we're ending up with is a lot of plastics out in our environment. It's estimated that we get about 10 to 20 million tons of plastics in our oceans every year. And you've probably seen pictures like this of beaches just littered in plastic waste. It's become a massive issue in our planet and in our oceans, causing problems for wildlife. We know that these plastics are breaking down into microfragments, and to be honest, we're not really sure what impact that's going to have on our planet over time. So these plastics are not going away, they just break into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, but the components of those plastics are still there. So what impact this is going to have on the planet in terms of biology, we're just not sure. And the reason we need to be thinking about it is that this is not a problem that's going away anytime soon. So if we look at the amount of plastic waste that's projected to happen, you know, we're right about here. If you look at our current system, our current model, we're not only expected to continue to produce plastic waste, but actually increase plastic waste. We have more people on this planet, more demands for plastic, we're making more of it every year, so it's only going to continue to rise. And in fact, one group has estimated that by the year 2050, so just over 32 years from now, 32 years from now, plastics in oceans will outweigh fish by mass. That's a scary number. That's still within my lifetime. We're going to have more plastic than fish in the ocean. So this is an issue. And it's even had some geologists dub this era the Plastocene Epoch, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek. And I highlight this particular study right here, the geological cycle of plastics and their use of stratigrapher indicators, to show that people are actually thinking about using plastics to age our planet. So when they dig down through layers of soil, they look at what types of plastics are being used, and that tells us how old the soil is. So it's kind of funny, but that it also tells me that when future generations look back on my generation, all they're going to see is plastic. That's my legacy on this planet. And I'm not really comfortable with that. So I'm certainly not going to stand up here and suggest that we stop making plastics and stop using plastics. They're great for so many applications. Think about healthcare applications, medical supplies, protective equipment. Plastics have made our cars and our planes lighter so that they're more fuel efficient. I mean, there's a lot of good things that plastics do. But we need to think about how they're being made and how they're being disposed. So right now, our economic model for most of the world is linear. We think about taking things from our environment, making something out of it, and when it's at its end of its life, it gets disposed of and it just sits there. We need to change this model. This is not sustainable. It's just gonna end up producing more and more waste. And so what we need to do, and what people that spend a lot of time thinking about this are advocating for, is moving towards a circular economy. So now when manufacturers are making products, not just thinking about their production and use, but thinking about the end of life and incorporating that into the model. So taking a systems view of these products. And that's what we really need to move towards. And so I'm going to be telling you today about one particular application of plastic and one sector where I think this move towards a more circular view actually has some traction and can make a dent in some of these plastic waste issues. And that's in agriculture. So the use of plastics in agriculture is dubbed plasticulture. How many people had a fruit or vegetable at some point today? Most of the people in the room, right? Good, you're all healthy eaters. Chances are whatever you ate was actually produced using some form of plastic. Okay, and you maybe have never even thought about that. If you're like me, you go to the grocery store, you got your reusable bag, and you pick the apples so you're not doing like prepackaged stuff, and you think, oh yeah, I'm not using a lot of plastic in my food. But chances are most of that stuff was produced using plastic. And so plastics in agriculture can take a variety of forms. Any gardeners out there know that things like seed trays and nursery pots are often plastic, if you go to your nursery and see that. Greenhouses or silage bags, so these are coverings for hay bales that help keep forage quality up, keep moisture out. Greenhouses and high tunnels, so plastics used to modify environments for plant growth. Irrigation drip tapes and hoses, so if you see at this bottom of the picture, there's a irrigation tape running out here that's made of plastic. And then plastic films, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So films used either for fumigating soil, they cover the soil and you can pump fumigants in for pest control, and plastic mulches, which are used as a surface cover here. So we use plastics in a wide variety of ways in agriculture. And about 40% of the plastic used in agriculture is for this one application. These are these plastic mulch films. So I want to talk a little bit more about what these are. So these are thin plastic sheets, and they're laid out, and the edges are buried in soil to kind of keep them down. They'll punch holes in them, and then plant plants or seeds in there so they come up. And these mulches have a couple key benefits. So first, they're put down for weed suppression. So if you're covering the soil surface, you just get the plants you want and none of the plants that you don't. So that's a good thing. Secondly, they have a lot of properties with respect to temperature modification of the soil. So if you're using these black plastic mulches, for example, in a cool climate, they'll absorb the sun's energy and heat the soil and warm the soil, and that helps crops establish earlier and can even extend the growing season for some people. Likewise, some people use white plastic in the summer to help cool the soil, to help keep plant roots from overheating, so we can modify soil temperatures. They're also great for moisture management. So they form this impermeable, somewhat impermeable barrier on the surface that prevents evaporation. So if you're irrigating, that water stays in the soil near the plant roots and it's not lost to the air. So we keep a lot of the water where we actually want it to be. And most growers that use this report improved fruit and vegetable quality. So if you're growing something like strawberries or melons that come into contact with the soil surface, if you can grow it on plastics, it just comes off a little cleaner and it's a little bit easier to get to the consumer market that way. So there's a lot of benefits to this. And so these plastic mulches are being used worldwide, about 1.4 million tons per year. About 80% of that is in China. And what it means is that we're able to get more yield per acre. This is why people are using them, because there is an added benefit. So it's estimated that for grains, these improve yields by up to 35%, for cash crops up to 60% yield gains. And the maybe ironic thing about these plastic mulches is that even though I just told you that plastics are sort of an environmental disaster, they actually have some really good benefits with respect to the environment when it comes to using them on farm. So they're improving water use efficiency. That means that we have to irrigate less. We're taking less water out. It also means we have to use less herbicides, and we lose less of the fertilizers to our aquatic systems. So they actually kind of can help minimize a farm's impact on the environment in that respect. And this is a major mission of agriculture right now, right? We have a growing human population. We don't have any change in the amount of arable land, so we have to figure out how to feed more people on the land that we do have. We need to figure out how to increase yield per acre without any adverse environmental effects. So plastic mulches are a key part or a key technology that's allowing us to feed more people on this planet. But the downside is that there is one major issue with these plastic mulches, and that is that they are designed to be single use. They're put out there for one season. After the harvest, that's it. They can't be used anymore. So then we have a big disposal issue. And none of the options are really good. So what do we do with these plastics after we use them to grow our crop? Well, in some places, particularly the developing world and in China, the common practice is to simply till these plastics into soil. And we see all kinds of examples of year after year these plastics just getting pumped into our soil. I don't think you have to be a scientist to know that this is probably not a good idea, but it has some serious effects. It reduces soil porosity. That means that the soil can't absorb water like it used to. It can't function like it used to. It affects crop roots, and so it'll affect crop yields because the roots can't get through that plastic. It has impacts on soil biota, so the living things in soil that make it so healthy. And then we're also concerned about some of the additives in plastics and some of the pesticides that are absorbed. You probably notice now that when you buy like a plastic water bottle, it says BPA free. So BPA was a plasticizer that was used for a long time. That's not in there anymore, but there are other plasticizers that are then going to be transported into the soil. So obviously that's not a great option. Here in North America, it's more common practice to actually remove the plastics from the field at the end of the growing season. This is laborious. It's not fun. You talk to any farm worker, they don't like having to do it. It's a lot of work. You have to pay labor to strip all that plastic out of the field. It still fragments, and you still get pieces left in your field, so it's not great. And even if you get it off your field, then you have to figure out where you're going to put it. Most recycling facilities, particularly here in North America, won't take these plastic mulches because they're covered in soil, so they're dirty, and it's just too hard to separate the two, so they won't accept that. So then you could take it to a landfill where you pay transportation or tipping fees, or if you want to avoid those costs altogether, many growers unfortunately practice illegal burial or burning, so where they stockpile it on site. So we're left with all these plastics that we just don't have anything better to do with. So what's the solution? Well, one solution that's out there, and what I've been working on, is using biodegradable plastics in this application. So let me just introduce you to the idea of biodegradable if you're not familiar with it. So biodegradable simply means products that can be broken down by microorganisms into their constituents. So something that microbes can eat, essentially. And biodegradable plastics are making their way into all different sectors, and you've probably seen, I don't know, this cafeteria probably doesn't do it, but other cafeterias will say biodegradable plastic or something like that. And so the idea is we can make plastics out of things that are more amenable to microbial degradation. And so how that works from a mechanistic standpoint is something like this. So plastics are essentially these long molecules called polymers. Polymers means many. It means many repeating units kind of strung out in a chain. So that's a basic molecular structure of plastics. Well, regular plastic has bonds between those units that most microbes can't break down. They don't know what it looks like. It looks foreign to them. They're not interested in it, and that's what makes it so tough. That's what makes plastic so durable. So when we make biodegradable plastics, what we do is we switch out the bonds and we put bonds in there that look like microbial food. So we put bonds in there that are attractive to microbes, that microbes know how to break down. It looks like other polymers that they see naturally, and so they have the capacity to digest and break down these polymers that are in biodegradable plastic. And so microbes, these big long molecules, are too big for a bacteria to take up into the cell. So what they actually do is they pump out digestive enzymes called depolymerases. And they snip, they're kind of like scissors, and they'll snip up those polymers into little bits. And those little bits can then be taken up by the cell and used as food. And what you get as an end product then is more bacteria, because it's growing, carbon dioxide and water. So they're basically digesting these plastics in a very similar way mechanistically to how you or I do it. They just do it outside of their body, and we like to do ours inside of our body, but it's basically the same way. So biodegradable mulches, biodegradable plastic mulches, are an alternative to our conventional plastic mulches made of these biodegradable polymers. They function the same as the conventional plastic mulchers, but the big difference is that at the end of the growing season, they're simply tilled into the soil, and the bacteria and fungi that the soil is full of can just break those down, and we're left with more microbes, carbon dioxide, and water, so harmless byproducts. So those mulches should just go away. So this is the idea. Great product, right? Been around for a while. We've talked to growers in Europe that have been using these for 17 years, so this is not necessarily a new product, but it hasn't gained a lot of traction, particularly here in the US. We think about less than 10% of mulch users are actually using biodegradable mulches. So we're trying to figure out why. And so if you put yourselves, are there any farmers in the room or ex-farmers? Just you, okay. All right, so put yourself in a farmer's shoe for a second. I come to you with this great pitch about this product that is gonna save you all this plastic waste, great mulch product, it's biodegradable, it's environmentally friendly, it's got the same benefits. What's gonna be your first question for me? You don't have to be a farmer to know that. How much does it cost? And of course, as you know, that's never a simple answer, right? So we're looking at that. What other questions might you have?
How hard is it to put down, and do I have the equipment to do it with?
Yes, and well, that all goes into cost. Yeah, absolutely. So the other big questions we're getting are, how are they going to affect the soil? Farmers recognize that soil is key to productivity, and they don't want to do anything. Particularly, you tell them till something into your soil, they're going to go, okay, you show me that that's going to be safe over the long run, right? I don't want to do anything that's going to affect my soil quality that might affect crop yields 10 or 20 years from now. Or the land for my grandkids. So I want to maintain my soil resources. And the third thing they just want to know is the performance aspect. How well are these doing? Okay, so they're biodegradable. What happens if they biodegrade 1 month into my growing season? I mean, then it's a waste of money, right? And then you still have weed problems. So they don't want it to go away too fast, but then they also don't want it to go away too slow either. You don't want to till it into the soil and 5 years later still have these pieces, even though they're biodegradable. You just don't want pieces of plastic in your soil. So these are the key questions that we get from growers and from regulators and people that are kind of thinking about this technology. So I'm part of a team of researchers comprised of faculty here at the UT Institute of Agriculture, as well as Washington State University and Montana State University. And we're trying to address some of these questions from a transdisciplinary perspective. So we have soil scientists, plant scientists, horticulturalists, material scientists looking at the plastic. We have economists, and we even have social scientists on the team, all coming together to sort of address some of these key questions related to mulches and their performance and what it takes for this to get implemented as a technology. So what I'd like to do with the rest of the time here is to just take you through some of the questions we're asking and some of the answers we're getting so far. So let's start with the big one. How much do they cost? And of course, this is never a simple answer. So our team of economists are working on this. And they work under the assumption that biodegradable mulches are going to work the same as conventional plastic mulches when it comes to yield and water savings and all those things. And they do. All of our agronomic studies to date have shown that they do work the same as regular plastic mulches. So compared to these conventional plastic mulches, how do biodegradable mulches do? Well, first, they are more expensive. And we think that this is actually one of the key problems with adoption is the sticker shock aspect. Growers take one look at the Why would I pay more for this stuff when I can get regular plastic at half the cost or a third the cost? So they definitely are more expensive. But when you take a step back and kind of look at the whole system, the whole production system, it evens out a little bit. So you have some considerable savings. So the biggest thing is you don't have the labor associated with removing those plastics off the field at the end of the growing season. And that can be a big labor cost, particularly if you're a large, hundreds plus acre operation. You don't have to pay disposal costs. So depending what part of the world you're in, this can be a huge savings. Here in the US, it's still not that expensive to throw things away, unfortunately. We got lots of space, so we just keep making more landfills. But you think of places like Europe where they've run out of land, they don't have the luxury of giant landfill space, and so it's much more expensive to get rid of things in those parts of the world. There's less long-term environmental impact. This is an extremely difficult thing to quantify from an economic model standpoint, but it's something we need to think about. If the conventional plastic results in decreased crop productivity over the long term, that needs to be taken into account when you think about the cost of using a product. And then biodegradable products may actually bring some additional revenue to the system that we're also trying to evaluate. So we've all seen over the last decade how much the organic food, whole food, local food movement has exploded. This is a huge sector right now. Consumers are willing to pay more money for food that they know was grown in a sustainable way. And so biodegradable mulches might be part of this. We don't have a way of communicating it now, but I could envision in the future you go to the grocery store and you pick up a pint of strawberries, and if it had a sticker on it saying grown on biodegradable mulches, well, maybe if you know how much of an issue this is, I might pay $1 more for those strawberries, right? So we can start to take into those costs into consideration. And what we're finding out is depending on what part of the world and some of these, how these costs play out, that it is actually economically viable to use these once you balance out all these costs. So it depends on how much labor costs, how much disposal costs, where you are. So that's what our economists are working on. The second question was about how biodegradable mulches affect soil health. What is the effect of tilling these mulches in year after year after year on our soils? And soil health, I use that term to broadly describe the capacity of soil to support life. So the capacity of soil to support crops, okay? And so when we think about how mulches might be affecting soils and their capacity to support life, there's a couple factors at play. So first, when they're being used as a barrier on the soil surface during the growing season, they're modifying soil temperature and moisture, they're decreasing plant and herbicide inputs, okay? So these are all the things that any mulch would do. And then at the end of the season, we till them all in, these fragments get incorporated into soil, and so we have some input of carbon, they're mostly made of carbon, into our soil that microbes are degrading. So mulches are kind of impacting soil in both these manners. And so what we want to see is when we put these things together, how do they affect the soil in terms of physical, chemical, and biological properties? And so to get at this, we're running parallel field experiments. We're in our third year right now, so this is ongoing. One here in Knoxville, one in Mount Vernon, Washington, so way northwest corner of the US, so very different climates and soil types. And we're running these block replicated experiments. We're running them exactly as a grower would grow. In this case, we're using pie pumpkins. And we're testing out 4 different biodegradable plastic mulch products. 3 of them are commercially available. One was an experimental film. And then we're comparing them to conventional mulch and to a cellulose paper mulch, which is some other product that some people use, and to bare ground control. So we can see how these mulches are performing from a crops perspective, from a yield perspective, from water savings. We are measuring probably everything that you can think of and then some to see if we can detect any change as a result of using these mulches. With respect to the soil, we're going in twice a year and pulling soil samples. We use monitoring equipment to monitor soil temperature and moisture over the whole experiment. We take these samples and we measure soil chemistry, soil physical properties. We even look at biological properties of soil. We look at the microbes that live in there and see if they're changing. I could spend a whole talk just talking through all the different things we're measuring, but I won't. But after 3 years of the project, we're not seeing any significant effect when we aggregate all this data together. So there's little changes in some of the parameters that we're watching to see if they come to anything bigger, but for now, when we aggregate all these measurements, we're not seeing that these biodegradable mulches have an effect on our soil, positive or negative. So it's a lot of data to collect to just get a no answer, but it's part of our job as scientists, I suppose. What's that?
Why is there a spring in 2016?
Oh, the data's just not up there. We've measured it throughout, but basically I could go on. It's just more bars that look exactly the same all the way across. So no treatment effects. It's very boring data to present. All right, so one of the other things we looked at, we didn't see effects on the microbes, but we were kind of curious about what other soil organisms thought of plastics. So we ran this little side experiment looking at how earthworms think about plastic. It was more of a behavioral study with earthworms, if you can imagine that. So what we did was we took these kind of glass aquarium type things packed with soil. We were using the common earthworm or Nightcrawler lumbricus terrestris. And what we did was we put our earthworms in with either cabbage or plastic biodegradable mulches or a mixture of both, just to kind of see what they would do with it, really. And so these earthworms, night crawlers, if you know anything about them, they're an anesic earthworm species, which means they form these very long vertical burrows. And how they behave is they hang out in their burrows during the day, they come up at night, they take plant leaves and organic matter and things to eat, and they pull it back down into their burrows. And we found that they actually did the same thing with plastic. So if you look at the side view of one of these containers, you can see that they've actually taken the plastic and pulled it down into this long vertical burrow. Now, we couldn't find any evidence that they were eating it. We don't think that they're ingesting it in any way that we could detect. We think that they just think it's a leaf, pull it down, and then get it there and are incredibly disappointed when it doesn't taste very good or whatever. But it is an interesting indicator that soil biota are going to interact with these plastics, and it's something we want to keep in mind when we think about it. All right, and our third and final question was, how well do these biodegradable mulches degrade in soil, and what controls their degradation rate? So we do have reports, anecdotal reports from farmers in different parts of the country, some saying it's breaking down too fast, some saying it's not breaking down fast enough. And we want to really get a handle on why. And this is going to be good information for the mulch manufacturers. They can start to tune their products or recommend certain products for certain parts of the world. So we're trying to get at this in a couple different ways. We're doing some field experiments where we can look at how these plastics are degrading once they're tilled into the soil. And how we do that is we take plastics and we cut them up into squares of known size. We sew them into these nylon mesh bags, put them on a string, and bury them in the soil. And this is going on both in Tennessee and Washington. And every 6 months, we dig them up, and we take one of those bags and we can look at them to see how the plastic has degraded, if it has. So this is kind of what they look like. So here's some examples of intact plastic. This is conventional polyethylene plastic, so it's not degraded at all. Whereas you see some of the biodegradable mulches have fragmented now into these tiny pieces over time. And we can actually use digital or software to get a digital capture and quantify the amount of breakdown of these products over time. And when we look at that, and I'll show you some example data from Knoxville and Washington, one of the things we're noticing is that the two sites aren't really behaving the same. So for example, this product right here, Organics, which is the green line, it's degrading really rapidly in Knoxville, but in Washington it's actually doing the worst of the biodegradable mulch products. So again, this is good information for the manufacturers. They know how their products are behaving in different climatic regions. We're also looking at these questions from a lab perspective where we can control things a little bit more than we can in the field. And so this is an example of a lab setup for us. We take soil, we take pieces of plastic, we put it into these extremely high-tech scientific vessels, also known as mason jars. They make for great labware. And what we do is we punch a hole in the top and put this rubber septa in there, which allows us to stick a needle in and measure head space. And we measure the amount of carbon dioxide that's being produced as a result of degrading these plastics. And so that gives us a metric of degradation. And so using this setup, we can test test different questions about what controls biodegradation. So for example, we can look at temperature. So here we tested biodegradation at different temperatures, 10, 20, or 30 degrees. And you can see, as for any of the products tested, as you increase temperatures, you get more biodegradation. That's not surprising. Anytime you increase the temperature into the system, you're going to get faster rates of breakdown. But now we can actually quantify the relationship between that. And so you can see this is the same plastic that was at 20 versus this same plastic at 30. And this might explain some of the geographic variation we're seeing in breakdown in our field studies because of different temperatures. We're also looking at the effect of weathering. So in this experiment here, the open symbols are plastics that were just taken right off the roll from a manufacturer. And this shows the biodegradation rate, which is relatively slow. When we take plastics that have been out in the field for a season, so they're exposed to UV, they're exposed to the climate, weather, rain, microbes, all that stuff out there, they have a much faster rate of biodegradation. So this shows us the importance of some of those other factors to breaking down these products. So again, could inform us of these climate variations. And then I'm a microbial ecologist by training, so we're also looking at the microbes that are involved in breaking these down. Biodegradation is a microbial process, so maybe by understanding the microbes that are eating these plastics, we can understand what's controlling the breakdown. And so that's one of the things we're looking at in my lab. So if we take plastic that's been sitting out in the field and kind of breaking down in the field after a season, if we look at it under a microscope, we see that there's a ton of microbes on these plastics. Microbes definitely like to eat these. It's definitely tasty for them. We can actually use DNA sequencing to look at the types of microbes that are there. So these bar charts show us the different types of microbial taxa that are actually growing on these plastics. And one of the things we noticed from this study is that the microbes that are on plastic, which are these bars here, look very different than the microbes that just live out in the soil over here, which are these bars here. And you can just tell without knowing anything about microbes that the different colors show that there's different types of microbes. So that shows us that it's not just soil sticking to the plastic that we're sampling, but there's actually a selection for certain types of microbes that like to eat these products. And so these are the types of microbes that we're really interested in studying. And so we can bring them back to the lab and ask more questions about how they eat plastics. So for example, here's a methylobacterium, and we noticed that it's enriched. It really likes to live off of these biodegradable mulch products, which are the first 4 bars here. They don't like the cellulose or the conventional plastics so much. So we've actually identified microbes that like to eat these plastics. And then we can grow them in the lab to study them even further. So here's a plastic on a petri dish. Here's some plastic in some microbial media. You can kind of see the fuzzy growth on it. And so we can actually start to study these microbes and their behavior in relationship to these plastics in the lab. And so that's what we're working on now. So that's the gist of what I wanted to tell you about today. Hopefully I've convinced you that these biodegradable plastic mulches are a really interesting and viable solution that could help reduce our plastic impact from the agricultural sector. We are working on, and I think we're getting to a good place where we can demonstrate that they're cost effective. We're not seeing these long-term effects on soil health, and we're working on a better understanding of what controls biodegradation in soil. And this information is really important to a couple key groups, and these are people that we interact with on pretty much a monthly basis as part of this project. We work with biodegradable mulch manufacturers so that they can better tune their products or recommend their products for different parts of the world. So for example, when they work in tropical systems, they recommend thicker mulches so that they don't break down as fast, and they know that through some of this research. We're providing scientific evidence for regulatory decisions. There's a lot of interest in maybe using these products for organic production, organic agriculture. But those regulators need hard proof that these are not going to be harmful to the soil before they allow them to be used in organic production. And of course, what we're always doing at UTI is education and support for farmers. So for people that are considering switching to this product, getting scientific-based evidence out to growers so they can make informed decisions on whether to use these products in their production system or not. So with that, I would just like to take a minute to thank some of the people. This is not even all of the people on the project, but some of the key players related to the data that I showed you today. So these are members of my laboratory, collaborators at University of Tennessee and at Washington State University. As I mentioned before, this project is funded by the USDA. And if you want to learn more about biodegradable mulches or about our project in general, we actually do have a website, biodegradablemulch.org, or of course you can always contact me. So thank you very much for your attention today. Yeah.
Are these things very sensitive to the pH of the soil?
Possibly. We have not run a pH experiment yet where we've altered soil pH, but we think that's going to be one of the key factors. We think temperature, moisture, and pH are going to be the big controls on that. So we've done temperature and moisture. We haven't done pH yet. It's a good question. Yeah.
You said that there have been places over in Europe that have used it for 17 years. Is there no data about their 17-year-old soil?
That's a great question, and actually something that just came up on a conference call I had last week. No, I'm not kidding. So we have anecdotal evidence. These growers say, I've been using it for 17 years. It's totally fine. I never have problems. It degrades every year. It's great. The problem is they're not scientists, so they didn't take a sample of their soil at the beginning and at the end, so we don't have that to compare it to. And they don't usually have some sort of control. So the farmer that's using biodegradable mulches is not going to use that on one field and regular plastic on the other. So we can't compare that. And the reason that's important is that what we're measuring, the idea of soil health, it's not a single number or a single something that we can just measure and say, yep, that's good, or yep, that's bad. It's all relative. So is it getting better or is it getting worse? And so without some sort of comparison, it makes it really hard to say things. So we could go into those 17-year soils and sample them and we'd get numbers, but we don't know if that's better than it was 17 years ago or worse or the same. We don't have that comparison. That's been one of the challenges. It's a great question.
That's still important data though, isn't it? To have.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, we have soil tests from those sites, and they look great and fine, but we don't know if it's from the plastic use or the fact that the farmers that are most likely using biodegradable mulch products are probably also practicing a lot of either organic ag or more sustainable practices in general. So is it some of their other production practices? So it's hard to tease apart the effect of mulch on its own in those systems. Yeah.
On the cost thing, I'm assuming that this is relatively new, so the amount of it being produced is pretty small. If that scales up with the cost of production from that?
Scale is an issue. So in Europe, where they use these much more, one of the big things is that they have more small distributors, and so it's easier for farmers to access. So they make a lot more of it in Europe. And so I think that helps it be a more attractive thing. Here in the US, we've heard some farmers say, yeah, I'm interested in the product, but no one locally is making it. And these are big, heavy plastics, so then you have to pay for shipping. So it's a scale issue, it's a distribution issue. But that definitely plays into the cost as well.
Do they seriously use it for grain?
In Asia, they do, yeah.
In what?
In Asia. They do. And actually, last summer when we were over in Italy, they were running some trials with rice, which was really interesting. So actually put it out, flood the field. Rice is grown underwater, and so they flood the field. And so you just see these plastics floating at the bottom of a pond, and then they drain it, and then I guess it goes away. So they're playing with it for rice, too. Yeah, it was a little strange. Yeah.
Can an average gardener get any of this stuff?
You know, that's a really good question. I would think so, but it's certainly not something you can find at like your garden center or Lowe's. Yeah, it's not there yet. It's not for mass consumer market. But I don't know, there's got to be ways to do it.
Is it hard to make? Chemical processing?
It's not necessarily harder to make than conventional plastics, but it's different. It involves some fermentation steps to make these molecules, to make the polymers, that are a little bit more involved. Depends what you're making it out of. But in terms of once you have the feedstock, so plastics when they're produced, you make the polymers and they all get put into these pellets, and then the pellets go to an extruder, and then they're formed into these sheets. So once you have the plastic the pelleted feedstock, then it's just the same as a regular piece of plastic in terms of molding. But They're more expensive to make, yeah.
Is the CO2 extrusion something you can measure to show the rate and the volume and the end result of this process? And the curve, I presume, goes up like this to start with, and then what is exponential at the end?
In terms of the CO2 production, like when we're running the lab experiments?
Either that or in the field.
Yeah, so the field is tricky because you have CO2 being produced from the plastic breakdown, but also just from the general soil organic matter breaking down. So soil is always breathing, there's always CO2 production. We have measured respiration in the field, and we're just not able to tease apart a signal based on the mulch compared to some of the other treatments, because I think there's a lot of background.
So what happens when the plastic breaks down? You've got a big piece, does it break into sort of semi-large and then it keeps getting smaller? Or what does it, and what's the final size in microns of this thing?
So if you're talking about conventional plastics, they keep breaking down into smaller and smaller micron-sized fragments without that parent polymer ever breaking down. Whereas with the biodegradable mulches, what's unique about them is that actual long string molecule is being broken down. And so they'll actually break down into smaller and smaller pieces until you have nothing but carbon dioxide and water. So there'll be nothing left of that.
And the end result is?
Should be just carbon dioxide and water, if they're working.
Sorry.
There should be just carbon dioxide and water, so there should be nothing left of it when we're done, if they fully biodegrade.
I suppose the other
So.
climate control people are worried about you.
No. That's a good question. No, it's the amount of carbon dioxide is so minuscule, and it's part of kind of the normal respiration of the soil. So that would be a very blip amount of carbon dioxide compared to everything else that's going on. We have far bigger problems when it comes to carbon dioxide than this. Was there a question over here? I think, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about the cost, why it costs more, but I think I heard you say the pellets are more expensive to make.
Yeah, the actual polymers are a little bit more involved to make because they involve fermentation of plant products, and it's a chemical engineering process that's just a little bit more involved. And our conventional plastics are made out of petroleum and petroleum byproducts, and those are dirt cheap right now. So until we raise gas and oil prices, that plastic's going to be easy to make. So, just saying. Yeah.
So the bacteria that you had on that graph, comparing bare soil versus the biodegradable plastic mulch, there were different bacteria. Is that harmful in any way?
We don't think so. So we are looking, though, to see if there's an increase or decrease in potential pathogens. So one concern is if I'm using these products, am I encouraging the growth of plant pathogens or crop diseases? And to date, we haven't seen any increase in pests as a result of using these products. So we think that they're just... These are microbes that normally exist in soil and just love to break down organic matter, so they normally feed off of dead plants, but for some reason they see these biodegradable plastics, a lot of them have starch, and they just think that's like sugar to them. You know, it's like cupcakes to my 3-year-old, you know.
So it's not overgrowth of anything?
Not that we can tell. No, we don't think that they're bad per se.
Why do you use pumpkins in your test?
So we needed a crop that would work in both Tennessee and Washington. And it turns out that is ridiculously hard to settle on because we have 2 very different climates and growing seasons. So for the first 2 years, we used pie pumpkins because they would work in both climates. We wanted something that had fruit that would actually rest on the plastics, because one of the things we also wanted to look at is if these plastics would stick or affect fruit quality in some way. So we wanted something that was going to rest. We wanted something that had a shaded cover, and so we settled on pie pumpkins for the first 2 years, but we couldn't do them more than 2 years because you just get a buildup of pests. You have to rotate out pumpkins, and so the last 2 years of the trial, we could not come up with anything else that would work in both locations. So we're doing bell peppers here in Tennessee, and they're doing sweet corn in Washington. And the trade-off is that here sweet corn would just be up and gone in a month, and that wouldn't give us enough time to really evaluate the product. So we needed something that would be a bit slower. So, yeah.
What kind of process do you have to go through to convert what's in the rock tin dumpster out there at Cedar Bluff to biodegradable material? Is it real selective in terms of what's required to make the material you're using here?
So the biodegradable plastics, they're manufactured to be there from the starting polymers, right? So
Yeah. They
So-
all start with polymers.
so you mean what would it take to get plastic manufacturers in general to switch over to biodegradable polymers?
Yeah, in the dumpster, you've seen it, where you do your recycling
Yeah.
during the week. It's got all kinds of plastic in it.
Yeah.
And is it possible to take that stuff and make biodegradable mulch out of it?
Oh, you mean recycle that back into?
Yeah.
No, because the base molecule in that is polyethylene, and it's not.
Yeah.
It can't be reconverted.
In order to make it, you have to start with new stock.
Yes, it's de novo. Yes.
You gotta have a petroleum product to get started.
So you can use petroleum to make biodegradable polymers, but they're synthesized to look at like that. But yeah, so you can't take conventional plastics and recycle them into being biodegradable. That doesn't work, unfortunately. So
Yeah, that's.
yeah,
They would do that.
that would be nice. But yeah.
Can we make biodegradable drinking cups and all the other things?
Yes, and we do. We do, yeah. You start to pay attention at restaurants more and more. You're starting to see biodegradable plastics. So the biggest application for these is single-use plastics, right? Because for things that you do want to last a long time, like your car, you don't want to make your car out of biodegradable plastic. You don't want it breaking down. I mean, you don't want it just like disintegrating in 5 years. So that's a bad application. But single-use plastics, so dinnerware, serviceware, packaging is a big one because we use it once and it gets thrown away. Those types of cups.
How is it designated on the product itself? If you were just to pick up a product, how would you know?
There are some conventions out there for designating biodegradable and compostable, and those two things are not necessarily the same thing. And so there's actually standard tests that are developed that manufacturers have to demonstrate that their product meets breakdown under these conditions in this period of time in order to get a biodegradable stamp. There's no one single logo right now. It's sort of all over. It's one of the problems with the market. It's very confusing to consumers what's biodegradable and what's not. So different people will mark their products differently depending on.
So like those salad containers, like I've tried to rinse them out recycling before, and then you rinse it under hot water and it shrinks up. Is that?
Oh, that would be like a starch-based one. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Is that the same kind of?
It's similar. Yeah, yeah. So it's a similar product. You'll also see compostable plastics out there, and those are a little bit tricky because a compostable plastic is designed to break down in a municipal compost pile, which is not your home compost. And that's really confusing to consumers. So municipal compost piles are managed such that you're getting high temperatures for long periods of time, and that's enough to break up that particular polymer, will break down under high temperatures and then can be biodegraded. You just put it in your backyard compost pile, it won't break down.
And
You've done it before, huh? Yeah.
So if you have that, is there any environmental advantage to buying that stuff if you don't live somewhere where they have a municipal?
There's not. And it's a problem. And I see, I don't mean to pick on anyone in particular, but like Jason's Deli, I've noticed that all their cups have gone to compostable plastics, but then everybody just throws them in the trash. So they're not going to go anywhere in the landfill because the landfill doesn't heat up. So there's no, yeah. Yeah, so I kind of look at that, I'm like, you're just doing this for marketing. This isn't helping anything.
Are there crops that are particularly good for growing in this way? Are there crops that you just wouldn't grow with the mulch?
So typically you would say that the big row crops and grain crops wouldn't be benefited much by this just from a scale issue because they're kind of a cheaper per acre. But they're doing it in Asia, so they must see some cost benefit to that. So the biggest thing is the specialty crops. So these are fruits and vegetables, things that are high dollar value over a small area. Those are the best crops for that. So we see it fruit and vegetable production.
One of those initial slides that you showed us, it had like a 600 designated to what is actually recycled, I believe. And
Yeah.
my question is that because of our lack of interaction to do it ourselves, or there's just only the potential to have it recycled is only so much, or is that a combination of the two?
It's a combination. So why aren't we recycling more than we could be? So it's partly consumers, right? We're kind of lazy, and if we don't immediately see a recycle bin there, we'll throw things in the trash. So it's partly us, but it's also partly recycling facilities as well. If it's not economical to clean up those plastics and make something new, they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart, right? It's got to have some economic benefit. And so they don't accept all types of plastic. So a lot of our packaging, right? A lot of the thin film packaging, none of that is recyclable, so that just ends up in the trash. And I read an article recently about what we were doing a lot is sending these recyclable plastics over to China to have them recycle it and reuse. Apparently that was more economically viable, was to ship it across the sea to recycle it and make something new. And the Chinese facilities are overwhelmed with plastics and they can't keep up with they don't need it anymore, so we're left with these, like cartons and cartons of plastic waste that nobody wants and can't make anything.
Well, there's another problem in China. They were plagued by having a lot of stuff in there that they couldn't recycle in any fashion.
Mm-hmm.
They called it contamination.
Yes.
And if you can ship uncontaminated in their terms to them, they'll take it, but otherwise,
Yeah.
they wouldn't take place.
Yeah, contamination is a big issue, and that's why these mulches can't be recycled, is because that soil contamination, it's too much work to get the soil away from the plastic to get anything useful out of it. So they're not gonna get their returns on that effort.
Food and stuff?
Food as well, yeah. That's why a lot of places won't take dirty.
What do you see as the future? Are we going to eventually go to plastics, some that will last for 3 months and others that will last for 30 years? Or
Like, do I see a future where we have both conventional and biodegradable products?
or does everything become biodegradable just a matter of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still always going to be application for things that you want to be permanent or want to last a long time. But we're also, I mean, even these plastics that are not biodegradable, conventional plastics, there are enzymes, there are microbes out there that can break them down. It's just a really slow process. So there may still be a market for those plastics, but they just have to be a much smaller part of the market. There's so much of the stuff we could use. We don't need to last forever.
So I just looked up, can I buy a biodegradable mulch for my garden? There's a bunch of products, but I don't know if they're real or not. This one claims starts breaking apart 4 to 5 months as the leading biodegradable mulch film sold in North America. Completely and safely breaks down when tilled into the soil.
Do you have a company name or a product name on that?
It's called Bio360.
That's one of the good ones. Yeah, that's okay. That's one of the good ones. That one will work. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think you can buy it on Amazon.
There you go.
One final question.
Yeah.
Are there existing regulations as to what, or if a company can call something biodegradable? Because, you can break this down into just smaller polymer chains, but it really doesn't biodegrade those chains to the elemental analysis. So
Right.
are there regulations? So if somebody says it's biodegradable, it truly will break down to the elements, carbon, hydrogen?
So the current standard to label something as biodegradable is that under composting or under warm conditions, so 60 degrees Celsius, you have to show that 90% has been converted to CO2 over 2 years. Okay. We currently don't have any standards for whether it's biodegradable in soil or not. So soils are at 20 C, they're not at 60 C, it's going to behave differently. So we don't know how to market something as biodegradable for that.
60 degrees C?
60 degrees, so warm, yeah, like composting temperatures. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a good
Dr.
question.
DeBruyn.